So welcome back to the Astronomy Garage. I'm your host, Reflector. This is a very special video because I basically get to interview somebody who does something really, really cool. And today we're going to be speaking with Jack Kellythorne, who designed the Orion XT10 and the Orion XT4.5 Dobsonian telescopes. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, the Orion XT series of Dobsonians has really been some of the most popular Dobsonian telescopes sold over the past 2+ decades. And as a personal note, I've had several of the Orion XT10s that have come through the workshop. And in fact, my very first large Dobsonian was an Orion 10-inch Dobsonian. So please welcome Jack Kellythorne. Nice to meet you. Thank you for taking the time for this interview today. If you can't tell, I'm really excited that you're here. I have not had a chance to talk to anybody who has designed telescopes. This is really, really cool. I have questions that I'm going to ask. Some of them are mine. Some of them are from subscribers. So many thanks to the subscribers that have posted them. And so I guess before we dive into the nitty gritty of the telescope design, let's talk a little bit about your background, like, where you're from, what college did you go to, and how did you end up at Orion?
Okay. Yeah, I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. Lived in Santa Maria at the time. Graduated. I came up to the Santa Cruz area in about 1988, and I did some disk drive work as a mechanical engineer, and then I did some tooling design as a mechanical engineer. And then I saw a very small ad for an engineer at Orion. I had already been buying their products. They're down in Watsonville, so that was about a 30-minute drive for me or so. So I thought, just on a lark, I'll go ahead and send in a resume. And this was back in the days of if it was email at all, it was painful. So I think maybe I actually carried the envelope down and handed it to someone in the lobby or something like that. And I did hear from them. We negotiated a salary, and next thing I knew, I was working in AutoCAD, 2D flat CAD.
Oh, okay.
And we were doing a lot of things. We were replicating a lot of the products that were made domestically. Some of those we were sending over to China to be, produced at a cheaper cost. And we eventually got around to the idea that we wanted to continue the legacy of the XT6 and the XT8 telescopes, the 6-inch and the 8-inch. So the previous designer was freelance. They didn't have another product designer up until then. They had someone they brought in temporarily for those two scopes.
Okay.
So what we did was we leveraged those scopes. Basically took a ruler and a yardstick and measured the bases, for example, to get the geometry of the base, that little curve that does the little dog leg in it, and the radius of the curves and so forth, and then just scale that up for the XT10, roughly. And then we decided, okay, contact the vendor for those two scopes, see what they were offering in terms of mirrors and spiders and secondaries and stuff.
Okay. Well, so that leads me into another question is that, and you may have already answered it right there. Do you develop the design and then say, hey, we need a mirror with this focal length? Or do you look at what's available for focal lengths and design around that?
The smart way to do that actually is see what they have, because they've already got the tooling for it. They've already invested in the polishing equipment and all of that and the mirror blanks. So if you need something with a custom size, you're starting from scratch. So that's a big time hit, in terms of manufacturing, getting set up. The second thing we had to do in the case of the XT10 in particular was make sure it would fit in a UPS shippable box. I had that conversation.
It's interesting what limitations you have.
Yeah. And it turns out there's some design quirks that I had to do on the XT10 to get it to fit in that box.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So one of them was I had to shorten the extension of the tube from the secondary mirror forward. It's about an inch and a half shorter than the ideal CAD would say that you want to have it for shielding the light from the sides.
Okay.
But if I made it any longer, it wasn't going to fit in the box with any end caps to pad it. And so we figured that one out right away. One of the other funny things that happened was we got the first sample in, and it rattled in the optical tube box. It was broken pieces.
Oh no! Okay, that's
so I asked them to do some ship testing, and they said, "No, we don't need to bother." And that was an internal decision in the company, not with the vendor. And when we did get it, it was like the mirror cell in the back, the three screws that hold it in were
Mhm.
brass. They sheared off, and
Oh,
the
wow.
primary went all the way to the front of the tube until it hit the other end of the box. And of
Like a
course, that
wrecking
takes
ball in
out.
there.
Yeah, it was. Yes, exactly. It's got an 11-pound mirror flying around in there.
Wow.
And everything's glass, so you sort of pour out the pieces, from the end of the tube. That didn't work. So the engineering fix on that was to they were M5 screws, 5 millimeter screws. And they were brass, so we went to a 6 millimeter screw and steel, which quadrupled the strength of the screws, and they held up after that. But if we didn't make that change, you never would have seen one because it would be an unviable product. We couldn't make the box any bigger, and we couldn't pad it anymore. So that mirror mount had to work.
Okay.
So that was that design corner we were stuck in.
I mean, that's interesting. I'm always fascinated by the limitations you don't think about, like the size of the box and that kind of thing, and shippability, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Uh,
By the time the consumer gets it, that's already been handled. And
yeah,
if you don't, and then there's some products that never see the light of day because of those issues.
because some of them it's too costly to overcome. Is that why?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, there's no product viability, if you don't solve those.
Speaking of mirrors, so the XT series is famous because it uses parabolic mirrors, which are
Yes.
very nice. That's kind of the nicer option, parabolic versus spherical. Something that I find fascinating is that the 4.5 inch, it has a focal ratio of just under 8. And that's that magic focal ratio where you could use a spherical mirror and it would be about the same as a parabolic mirror. But
Yeah, yeah. The
you guys
difference is
still went with the parabolic. And I thought that seems like you were focusing on the quality there.
that was actually an existing optical tube assembly that they already had, and they were already making it parabolic. So we would have been
Okay.
silly to say no to that. Again,
Right.
it was
Yeah.
an existing product, right?
Yeah.
They had the secondary, they had the spider, they had a decent focuser. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was Guansheng, as I remember back that the nearly 20 some years. They did pretty good quality for what they were, as a Chinese vendor. So we didn't have any real complaints with that. There were some minor tweaks we did, I think, mostly on the 10-inch, because things were
Okay.
a little more critical on that one. But the XT 4.5 was a repackaging of an existing optical tube assembly. So we put it into a dobsonian mount, and there were some interesting things that we had to do to get that to be an interesting and viable product.
Is that because of the F8 and the length or the base height or
Yeah, exactly. It's if you because the mirror is proportionally a smaller piece of the mass compared to the
Mhm.
tube, and the focusers will stay the same. An inch and a half focuser
Very
is the
true. Yeah.
same regardless of what scope you put it on. And then the front spider gets a little bit bigger because the vanes get longer, but otherwise the secondary mirrors, they grow slowly as the volume
Hmm.
of the scope grows. So the balance point on that optical tube is very close to the middle, which makes for a really awkward Dobsonian,
Yeah.
close to
Very
the
very
ground.
tall, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The,
And the other thing we were doing was the tension springs, which I actually found on the internet. The tension springs.
oh, really? Okay.
Some amateur was doing that, right? So some of these are amateur derived. So what the benefit of that is you can optimize the force against the little Delrin pads or the
Hmm.
Teflon pads, and you get a much more stable scope. You're sucking it down into the support, the trunnion bearings, for altitude, and you get a just much more stable vibration damp scope that way.
Okay.
So between doing that, which is opposed to doing it on a tripod, which would wobble and shake and frustrate
Yes.
most people, especially on a scope of that size. It just rings and vibrates, and Jupiter will go in and out of the focus, the eye,
Hmm.
your eyeball, because it's just moving so fast, right? It's
Right.
just irritating as all get out. So we did
Yeah.
that, and then the other thing we did to make the balance point different was we put that spring we were already going to put on it. We offset it towards the mirror end, the rear, to give a counterbalancing force like a garage door opener springs.
Okay.
So when the scope was horizontal, we were pulling it down with, I want to say, a couple of pounds extra force towards the rear so it wouldn't droop. And when it was up vertical, the springs were in line. So all it was doing was pulling it down into the base harder vertically. It wasn't wanting to tip it. And then we tried to
Okay.
optimize the angle of that versus the angle that the spring changed. And we fiddled around in an Excel spreadsheet to minimize the error of that because I knew where the
Okay.
center of mass was and what the scope weighed. And that ended up working really well. We offset, I want to say, 3/4 of an inch from the center backwards. And
Wow.
it just, anytime you let go of it, it didn't droop or didn't rise in the base.
That's actually a pretty clever tweak to the
Yeah, it
design
is. It
from an
was.
engineering standpoint.
Yeah, it was. And we saved, God, we saved at least 6 inches or more on the height, which made it a shorter scope, right?
Okay.
And a lot less weight of the particle board for the base is really heavy. So you could pick it up. They had a little handle on it, basically above the trunnion bearing. So you could pick that
Okay.
scope up with the base on it and walk around with the whole scope in
Oh,
your hand
wow.
and set
Okay.
it back down again, which made it handy for the parents, right? So if they
Yeah,
wanted
that
to
is.
move the scope to a different spot in the yard to miss that tree that they wanted to see past, they could pick up the whole scope without having to reset it and fiddle around a lot.
That would be nice if you could do that on the bigger telescopes.
Right?
Yeah.
You could do that, but you just couldn't pick it up.
Yeah. Well,
So
just real quick. So you worked at Orion. What time frame roughly were you
I
working at
want to
Orion?
say in 1999-ish, that era. I remember driving to work and hearing about the Twin Towers coming down on the radio
Okay.
driving into work. So that era.
Okay.
Um, and you start the scopes roughly almost a year ahead before you need to sell them.
So
You've
that's the lead
got
time, about a year for
yeah
design and testing.
yeah it's 9 months if everything goes right. It's about
Okay.
9 months. You've got a long boat ride to get there. You've got to get it in advance of Christmas.
Okay.
You've got to get the vendors' attention when they stop building. Then that's the time to do a new product because they can pay attention to it. If they're going to make any changes on their assembly line, you got a window to get them in there. So yeah, it's supermarket driven that way. You know, Christmas was obviously the big deal for consumer scopes.
Sure. Sure. In fact, I have, I have, well, it's a little, I have a 2015 Orion Holiday.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, and it has the classic XT10 right there.
There it is. Yeah. Yeah,
That's it.
I got the second out of the next batch of five. The first one we just sort of tipped into the trash can and kept the optical tube because we were going to experiment where the how to put the bearings and stuff on it.
Okay.
But other than that, it was scrap. So I couldn't get the
Okay.
first one, but they did get me one of the first five that came in on the next batch, right?
Yeah. Well, so when you came in,
Hmm.
they had already designed the XT8, and those I assume those were pretty big sellers, and I assume at that point they were probably getting people were asking for, can you get us a bigger one?
Yeah.
Is
There
that?
was some pull, some demand, right? And that was the next logical product.
Mhm.
You know, like I said, they were enjoying a lot of success. And we were able to do it for a really reasonable price, based on the Dobsonian technology. Being this, I think I told you the base was around it was a $500 retail scope, right?
Okay. Hmm.
499 or something like that. So the base only cost us about I want to say 18 or $20 our cost. So the
Okay.
optical tube was the rest of the money for that.
Yeah, and most of that was the mirror, right?
Well,
I'm
yeah,
guessing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a rolled steel tube is the same thing you see on your chimney.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
no
That's right.
casting
Yeah.
sheet, right? It's just cheap sheet metal painted black. And the secondary mirrors, a couple of pieces of hardware, and a small flat mirror, which is easy to produce. So yeah, you can throw a lot of money proportionally into the optics of the scope.
Okay.
And that's what made such a good value was that we got a good quality mirror, we got a good secondary, we got a pretty reasonable focuser for it. And then
Hmm.
so bang for the buck wise, that's where the money went, was into the optical tube.
Right. And eventually, they almost all started coming with Crayford focusers. I'm a big fan of the Crayford focusers. So it was just like
Yeah.
the
I
Dobsonians
kind
are
of
just great.
that might have been after my time, I think. I think I had a
Okay.
vacuum pinion, in the first versions. Crayfords are good. A small bit of trivia. The anodized shiny black aluminum is about as
Yes.
reflective as silver, as it turns out.
Yes.
It's the shininess that determines the reflectivity, not the color. So unless
Oh,
it's
okay.
flat black,
Okay.
if it's shiny and anodized, it's the same as aluminum and anodized.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just as reflective. So that was kind of a misnomer, as it turns out. So some of the crayfish you saw on the market were actually sort of like sandblasted aluminum.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So
In
that
fact, yeah, one of them that I was just working on, it looked like that. That does bring up a good question. So the Crayford focuser, usually when you're using it, or whatever the focuser tube is, um, a little bit is into the tube, but generally it's mostly out by the time you get into focus. I always wondered why the outside of the focuser tube was not painted black. They're almost all that silver or shot blast
mhm.
texture color. Is that just the cost savings, or is the assumption that the tube will be far enough out of the telescope tube?
If it's the shot blasted, it's a matte finish, and it doesn't return specular light. It diffuses it. So it's the amount of the
Oh,
shinier something is, the more mirror-like the surface is,
yeah,
the more
polished.
specular, yeah, polished, the more it shoots the light back at the angle of incidence and the angle of reflection. If it's
Okay,
rough, it mixes the rays and diffuses them so that they're
okay,
much less. That's like an opaque thing on your fluorescent light. Instead of glaring in directly, spreads it out and diminishes the intensity.
well, that's fascinating. I just learned something new.
Yeah.
I've for the past year or so I've been painting them flat, but
Well,
it turns out I probably don't need to do that.
if it's flat black and the paint is other than super shiny, yeah, you're doing the same thing. You're making a roughly matte surface,
Yeah.
on some scale, and it's diffusing the light. Yeah. So
Okay.
I would say you keep doing that. If it was a different color, people would get upset, but it would still probably work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Right.
one question that I got also is a lot of the Dobsonians came with kind of a dark gray painted. The inside of the tube was dark gray instead of a matte black. Was there a purpose behind that, or was it just anything matte is better than?
Um, it doesn't make any difference if you look at the actual performance. You can't detect the difference, and I suspect they probably got a deal on a bulk shipment of paint or something. That
Okay.
would be my guess.
Okay.
We didn't have a lot to say about the factory in process stuff. We would just test the mirrors and the overall quality, of assembly and stuff when we got them, but we didn't dictate how the process was run in their factory.
Okay.
Kind of like not our business even.
Okay. On the design side, so a lot of Dobsonians for the azimuth, they have Teflon on like a Formica or something like that, and
Yeah,
some have lazy Susans. What is your opinion
right.
on what works best?
Up to at least the 10, and then on some of the lighter 12s, the 3 points of the Teflon on a Formica-like surface
Hmm.
works pretty good. There was some magic number, pounds per square inch of loading, on a square inch of Teflon that we were
Okay.
trying to hit. And if you stayed with, I want to say plus minus 20% of that number, you were kind of good. When you get to the bigger and heavier scopes, that's maybe when you want to start doing some load sharing, where we have like a center pole post
Hmm.
because it takes some of the load and the rest of the load is distributed around the perimeter.
Hmm.
And then Lazy Susan is another one. I never got to mess with any of that as an engineer, so I don't have a like good tactical feel for it. I
Okay.
suspect that's just a lot of trial and error and see what works. And I think you or somebody else did one where you took it off, you cleaned all the roller bearings or whatever in it, and then put it back together. Probably worked better because you got the gunk out of it.
I think generally speaking, yeah. I will say this. I have a 12-inch that I restored. It's not an Orion, forgive
Mhm.
me. But it's on a lazy Susan,
Yeah.
and it actually it spins too easy, if that can be a problem. And basically, if there's even the slightest breeze, it just blows. Or if the ground is not perfectly level, its own little basically the CG, it
Yeah,
it starts to
there's
rotate.
a
So
real sweet spot in the amount of static versus dynamic friction that you want to do. The stars move very slowly, so it's not like you have to get this telescope up to a rotational velocity
right,
quickly,
yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
You can nudge it, and then when you let go, you want it to stop moving and not move on its own.
Hmm.
There were some scopes I saw on the amateur posts that were they're actually putting a little like a spring loading to push it back down into the bearings to
Oh,
try and
okay.
put a little artificially heavier load against the bearing so it wouldn't do what you just said, which
Okay.
was move around in the breeze. So
Yeah.
you can make them too easy, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Um,
that was my lesson on that one. That's the only one I have that has the Lazy Susan. All the other ones are Teflon. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Although I have one that's Teflon on a record album. That
That's
that was
it's
an
an
experiment.
there was a really viable early days of the internet. We're talking like AOL dial-up and stuff era. A lot of amateurs were trying a lot of crazy things, right? Some of them stuck, like the spring. I can't remember the gentleman's name that did that. I would like to
Hmm.
give him a credit if I could remember, but I don't. That was a super usable innovation. And then people were looking
Hmm.
at things you could do at home, right? So I'm kind of the opinion now that we've reached peak dobsonian, but there isn't a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of innovation out there left. Those dark corners have
Yeah.
all been explored.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, you're right. No, continue. Yeah. I like
yeah,
that statement.
it's pretty
Peak
well
Doxonian.
optimized. Yeah, I think that there, if anything, they're going to be tiny incremental tweaks as opposed to any big breakthroughs now.
Hmm.
Because all the amateur telescope making sites have dried up, and you don't see them in the back of Sky and Tel anymore. And Riverside telescope makers stopped doing their annual conference.
Okay.
So I think we have hit. It's as good as it's going to get for the amateur, do-it-yourselfer.
I mean, I like that term peak Dobsonian. I hadn't
Right? Yeah.
actually heard that before. One of the questions we got was, how do you decide how high to build the base on a Dobsonian?
Okay. So the answer is as low as possible. For a lot of reasons. Particle board is heavy.
Yeah.
Particle board is expensive to ship. The So you want to keep it as low as possible. You don't want the user to have to carry around an extra tall base. Um, so the adapter you do on that is the height of the chair you sit on, right? We used to sell adjustable height chairs
Hmm.
as an accessory, and I had one myself that I actually bought from Orion. So yeah, so in the case of the XT4.5, we deliberately made the base as short as we could with a reasonable spring force for that spring to be offsetting torque for it, right?
Hmm.
So if we had made that spring any stronger, we could have moved the base back and made it a little bit shorter, base a little bit less tall, but it would take two people to pull the spring down to hook it up.
Yeah.
So there was like an upper limit on the practicality of that, right? So that was how we set the height of that one, plus or minus a quarter inch kind of thing. And on the XT10, the balance point is fairly close to the rear because the mirror is so heavy compared to the rest of the scope tube that came out at a reasonable height. And you just make it just enough to clear the bottom of the center bolt for the rotation and swing up. And you just give yourself a little margin for that. So someone drops it in, they don't ding up the bottom of the mirror so when it's fully out. So
Okay.
you
Okay.
give a tiny bit of clearance, but you set that as low as you can.
Okay. Okay.
And then the bigger scopes are proportionally lower. The 12 in 14, 6 or 17 inches, I guess. The
Hmm.
pivot point's really low compared to the length of the overall tube because the mirror is so heavy. And we
Okay.
never bought, and then shipping counterweights is a bad deal for UPS too. So you would never add a counterweight to make it even lower. That was another thing that isn't practical, economic terms.
Okay. Were there any features that were removed at the last minute or added?
We added the nav knob, which was a MasterCard off-the-shelf part, which we eventually had a Chinese equivalent. That made it a lot easier to push around the XT10,
Okay.
um, especially
That's
in
the little knob up front,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That really, and I set it up for a right-handed, right-eye male, 6 foot tall because that's me.
Okay.
I set up the
Okay. So
geometry
now
for
we know.
that,
We
right?
know.
So I have
Now we
my own
know.
demographic on that one. But it especially made it easier to move in azimuth, especially when you're near the zenith.
Okay.
So you got a little bit of torque on the outside of the tube instead of grabbing the eyepiece and changing the focus
There
or
you go.
something to
Yeah.
move
Yeah.
around, right? Yeah. Um, we It was an accessory that we procured. We finally got I want to say a 50 millimeter right angle correct image finder scope. That really made that scope a lot easier to use. That was something you had to buy extra, but it was really a really big enhancement for the usability of it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a big fan of
Um,
those, by the way.
yeah, I am too. That's what I had on my scope. That's what I
Mhm.
ended up using. Um, I had to stop the owner of the company from changing the design of the XT4.5. He wanted to do something different or make it lower or something like that. And it didn't make any sense. He wanted to add a counterweight or something to it. It's like, no, that's a horrible idea. And the design window is already set. If we change anything, we'll miss the window. There we had to stop him. It was he wanted to change it at the last second. It's like, no, we can't do that and still deliver the product. So
Okay.
nice idea. If we get another chance at this later, we'll consider it, which we knew we would never would. But just to placate him, we said, yeah, okay, good idea. Can't do it. On to the next, you know.
Well, was that back in the days when Tim
Yes,
Geisler, is that his
yes,
name?
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
guys.
He's the one who started it, right? He started it from
Yeah.
scratch.
Real quickly, his father had a business doing electronic drives for equatorial scopes that would do the sidereal rate correction and also a solar rate correction in
Oh,
a. I had one of them at one time, actually, one of the vintage ones. That was his father's business, who was basically a TV repairman, and got into that as a little
okay.
sideline, and then the line expanded over the years under Tim there. So that was a little bit of the origin story, a very little tiny snippet of it there.
It started in Santa Cruz and then moved to Watsonville. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah,
Something like that. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah. They had
Okay.
a retail store in Santa Cruz, a really small one, a really limited product line. Um, Once they got hooked up with the Chinese manufacturers, the business really exploded.
Okay. They
And
were able
I
to
took
basically leverage up from that point. Or
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah. They literally started with drive correctors and built their business around that.
Okay. I know you've met some interesting people along the way.
Yes.
I remember looking up at the Hale-Bopp comet, but you actually met uh, them, right? Or at least one of them, right?
Yeah. They were that same year in, I want to say, May. Hale and Bob were at the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference, and they both had a presentation. They
Okay.
discovered it within something like 20 minutes of each other, I think was the
Oh,
number.
wow. Okay.
And Hale was a professional astronomer, and then Bob was an amateur. And Bob brought I think I want to say it was a 12 or 14-inch scope that he used to discover it with a little brass plaque on it that he made for himself.
Oh,
He
wow.
brought that
Okay.
to Riverside. So I got to look through the scope that found Hale Bob, right? That was kind of cool. And then John Dobson was there one year, which was really nice. And so we all should like bow down to John because he's enabled our hobby in such a good
Yeah.
way. Um, he was very unconcerned with the mechanics or design of any of the scopes. His interest was seeing the universe and feeling part of it and connected to it. He was completely uninterested that we had used his design and it was so widespread because it was a Dobsonian. He
Mhm.
was happy that people were looking at the sky with it.
Okay.
So
That's
he was
that's
he
pretty
was
awesome.
technology agnostic.
Wow.
You
So
know,
he just wanted people to just look at the
yes,
sky.
yeah. He has a famous quote. They started doing star parties in Yosemite, and one of the rangers complained that, well, the sky is not a part of the park, kind of dismissively. And John says, well, yes, but the park is a part of the sky.
Ah. Okay. Well, from what I've read, that sounds like something he would say.
Yeah. That's an actual quote that I've seen attributed many times. Yeah,
Okay.
and he was very self-effacing. You wouldn't pick him out of a crowd. He didn't um, like no ego involvement in it. So just
Mhm.
very, very down to earth. I think he was a monk at some point. I forget
Okay.
what brand of Buddhism, what flavor, but that he used to sneak out and find a trashed up sauna tube from construction, and then I think it was a porthole mirror he ground his first mirror with or something like that.
Okay.
So it was just he had no money, right? He had taken a vow of poverty, and
Mhm.
so it was his home built, except for maybe making your own glass you could possibly do as an amateur.
Yeah. 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 He was, and there's a video of him, uh, basically showing how to make a
Yeah,
mirror on YouTube.
yeah,
It's pretty fascinating. So yeah,
yeah.
it's
That
pretty neat.
and it was all about getting to see the sky. These were just steps to get there, and so like I said, the Dobsonian mount, I mean, rightly is named after him. It might have existed in other forms, but he made it so simple.
Hmm.
and easily to do that even commercially, it's the right thing to do.
So for everybody that was watching, I apologize. My Zoom ran out, so we've restarted it. So I apologize to you, uh, Mr. Kellythorne, for that.
No
Um,
problem.
we're restarting. We have a few more questions if you got another just a few more minutes. And one of those is how did you decide on basically the field of view and things like that?
Yeah, it's silly, but what we decided was we wanted a half a degree field of view so you could see the full moon. That is
Oh,
the first
okay.
object people look for in a new scope because it's the one that's obvious, the
Hmm.
easiest to find. If they're going to see, does this thing work at all? That's the first thing they pointed at.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we wanted, and we had, I want to say, 0.55 or something degree field of view, just a little over the full moon. You could get the full, with a
Hmm.
low power eyepiece, you could get the whole thing in there. And you had a lot of light. You actually had to use a filter so you didn't hurt your eyes because it was a little bit too bright. At 8 inches, you don't need a filter, but at 10 inch, you kind of do because it's a little too
Hmm.
intense. So yeah, so that was, as silly as it sounds, that was the criteria, right?
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I found when you go to a star party, sometimes if you give people an opportunity, do you want to see the Orion Nebula or do you want to see the moon? Almost everybody's going to first say, "I want to see the moon." So
Yes.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the most approachable. There's some subtleties in like the other nebula and stuff that you need like dark adapted eyes, but the moon just smacks
Yeah.
you in the face.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the low hanging fruit.
Okay. One question I have is so you designed the XT10, it's super popular over the years. Where have you seen it? Have you seen it in interesting places or just stumbled
Yeah,
upon it?
yeah, it was such a good value and good performance that I saw it at a couple of public facing observatories. I saw it at Chabot. I
Okay.
drove up there one night and there's an XT10 sitting outside with a line of people on it that they're using to show the
Yeah.
public the sky. I saw one really surprisingly at Mauna Kea at the visitor
Oh
center at
wow. Okay.
9,000 feet or whatever it was there. And for the same reasons, $500 retail. And
Hmm.
they've got an instrument you can see a lot. And in that particular case, it's so dark, it's amazing
Hmm.
what you can see through that scope, right?
Yeah.
And it's user friendly. You just have to every third person you repoint it a little bit. Who's ever run in the scope, just every third person you just nudge it a little bit and you're back in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I saw one. I was walking downtown Petaluma one night, and there's a sidewalk astronomer standing there with 6 people lined up looking through the XT10.
Oh wow. Oh wow. They're
So
following in the footsteps of John Dobson there.
yeah, they were literally doing that, right? They called themselves a sidewalk astronomer, and I go. So I had to walk up and say, yeah, that was my scope, right? Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
it was fun.
Seeing your own invention out in the world has got to be
Yeah,
pretty satisfying.
that's the most gratifying part of my whole engineering career, 30 some years, and maybe that moment was peak engineering happiness for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. And there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of them out there. There's got to be a lot of them. I
The
mean,
last time I
super
bothered
popular.
to look, which was many years ago, I estimated on their sales at well over $1 million worth of that scope was sold at
Whew.
500 bucks. So
Wow.
whatever the
Okay.
math is on that.
Yeah. Okay. So again, super popular, right? The
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
XT series is just
it was a
great.
really, really good, solid performing bang for the buck.
Okay.
It was really hard to
Yeah.
argue with the performance versus price on that, right?
Hmm.
I had
Okay.
mentioned peak Dobsonian, and that was pretty close
Yes.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost that the 8 and 10 inch, they're almost at that sweet spot, right? Where
Yeah,
they're still portable
yes,
to a certain extent, but they're not like I once had a 14 inch, and that was just an absolute backbreaker to move.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't have the 14 inch anymore. So
gotcha.
I do have the smaller ones. So yeah.
I actually gave my scope to my neighbor. I had got a little burned out because I was doing it for work and as a hobby.
Okay.
It just got to be too much. So I finally gave my scope to my neighbor and my set of eyepieces,
Okay.
So
Do they have any
yeah.
idea that you design?
Oh, yeah, they did. And one of my other neighbors had bought one before he knew me.
Okay.
So at the
Oh
end of the
wow. Okay.
block was another neighbor that owned one, and he had it in his garage.
And you
And
just
we were
walk up. You
talking
just have
one
to
night
say
at
thank you.
Yeah, he was. He was really happy about that. Yeah. So yeah, it was a point of pride for him to know the designer when he was showing it,
Yeah,
using people, having people use the scope with him, right?
that's
So,
pretty
oh
neat.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, my neighbor designed this. Yeah. So small world thing.
So this will probably be, I guess, the last question or close to the last question.
Sure.
So other than Dobsonians, what other kind of optic tools have you used? What other kind of telescopes or anything,
Um,
binoculars, that kind
I,
of thing?
I was there's two answers to that. I was half owner of a Celestron C8, and that was
Okay.
kind of an interesting way to own a telescope because they spend 90 some percent of their time in the garage, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And depending on who was free the weekends and the nights it was dark and whether they're going to travel, got collection of the footlocker with the scope in it, right?
Okay.
So you could own the scope for half the cost, and it's almost like you never not had it when you needed it.
Yeah.
So the utility was 100% availability as far as you were concerned at half the price. So that worked out good. That had a pretty good nuisance value. Set it up on a big 6-inch pipe pier.
Mm.
That had a lot of overhead to set up too. Um, One of my favorite and easy to use things was a set of 105 millimeter binoculars on a parallelogram mount.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so regardless of where you stuck it into the sky, it would stay still if you let go of it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Those are
you could
neat.
look almost straight up, or you could look near the horizon, and then stable view with that, and that just took the fatigue out of holding those binoculars.
Hmm.
So and then interestingly enough, the same night I found the XT10 up there at Mauna Kea, I set this guy up, on a tall tripod, and we looked at the Andromeda Galaxy, and the 105s had like a three plus degree field of view.
Oh,
You can
okay. Wow.
you can see all of the Andromeda Galaxy. You can only see the center portion in a scope at one time.
Hmm. Yeah, and if you
So
have a dark sky, you definitely get a great view.
yeah. So there were astronomy students there from Hilo that had never seen all of it before. So that was the first time they saw the extent of the galaxy with their own eyes, other than a picture. So that was pretty cool to contribute to. That's what that looks like.
That's pretty
And
awesome. Well, I've gone through the list of questions, and I very much appreciate your time. Again, this is super exciting to me because I've never actually spoken to a telescope designer. This is a first opportunity to do that. So,
there's not a bunch of us around, and most of it's been done already.
because if you're working at Orion, they're going to be intermingling with all kinds of people that are basically, astronomers and people within
Yeah,
that industry.
yeah. And you're talking to telescope manufacturers. You're talking to different people in
Hmm.
the industry. Well, some of it's as simple as trying to figure out what products you're going to rep for them. I did get to meet uh, John, was it Nagler, from
Oh yeah, yeah.
Teleview.
Teleview.
He was
Yeah.
at Riverside one year. And I got to look through some of his filters that hadn't been released to the public yet.
Oh
So that was
wow.
kind of
Okay.
cool. He had a filter for the Orion Nebula. It was sort of a gold tinted filter.
Yeah.
And there were details I had never seen before in that nebula with his particular filter. So yeah, you got to rub elbows with some of the interesting people in the business. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's fun. So I'm glad you're still out there representing the hobby here. Having people keep their scopes in good repair and
Yes. Yeah.
keep looking through them, right?
Yes. That's the goal, right? Is if their telescope is, especially because I focus mainly on Dobsonians, but
Yeah,
if anybody has a Dobsonian, then my goal is for them to be able to fix it themselves and keep using it to look at cool stuff in the sky. So
yeah.
that's
There's still that's I think that contributes to the uh, overall elevation of society. We have people that can appreciate our surroundings and have some perspective.
absolutely yes.
Yeah.
And so from one engineer to another engineer, thank you very much for your time.
Well,
I
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
It's been a lot of fun to reminisce on this.
Okay. Well, hey, if anybody out there has your XT10, make sure you take it out tonight and point it up at the sky. All right.
Yeah, be looking at the moon. It's almost a full moon tonight.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah, that's
depending on
right.
when you
Yeah.
release the video, right?
It'll,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. It'll be perfect. There you go.
Right.
All right. Well,
Okay,
clear
great.
skies, everybody. Oh,
All right. Thank you very much. Clear
clear
skies.
skies. Well, I hope you had as much fun as I did. If you want to see more interviews like this one, please gently push that like button and leave a comment down below. For updates when I release a new video, go ahead and push that subscribe button. Now, if you like this video, check out these 2 videos as well. I think you might enjoy those too. Again, thanks for watching, and clear skies, everybody.